just want to start, though, by telling you about something that happened more than 60 years ago when I was about 13 or 14. I used to cycle about 5 miles to school, and near me, I don't know exactly where, there was what you might call a weakling, a very timid boy with the name of Walter, and everybody called him Wally. And I sort of got vaguely friendly with him. He used to hang around with my little gang of blokes in the school. And one day, Wally was very late arriving at school because he got told off as soon as he walked into the classroom, sat down, and he started crying. And the teacher, Mr. Evans, who was one of these ramrod straight ex-army types, shouted at him a few times, but he didn't stop snivelling. And in the end, Mr. Evans, the teacher, said to him, "What are you crying about, boy?" And he said, "My tortoise has died, sir." And we all laughed because it was such an unexpected response. Even Mr. Evans laughed. But gradually, sort of this crying, this quiet crying in the room got to Mr. Evans, and he very kindly let the boy home. And that was the last we ever saw him, because that weekend, Wally threw himself under a train. And that was my first introduction to the whole idea of suicide, and I was young, and life seemed great to me. You know, I had a happy childhood, and I was trying to connect up to people and things and ideas and, you know, the nature and all the rest of it, as one does, and girls, you know. And so why would somebody do that? And it's a question that's been in the back of my mind for a long, long time. And eventually, I went and did a number of things, but eventually I got interested in training for psychology and psychotherapy. But that's after I'd run a quite successful design and print business. And I met Joe Griffin. And together, we started courses about things like depression, anxiety disorders, trauma, and so on, and wrote various monographs. And people said, "You should put them in a book." So we put them in a book, and this is the book. And I hope some of you at least have read it. We get many people writing and saying this book and our book on depression has saved their lives, literally, because it's got explanations for things in it. It's not waffle, it's not psychobabble, it's sort of scientifically sound, but also gives you a handle on things that are ordinary things. So we're here to talk about mental health, and it's very odd that when people talk about mental health, they're really talking about mental illness. And I don't know why we switch the words around, but we do. You know, oh, this is the mental health czar or something comes up on Parliament, but actually talking about the problem, which is that large numbers of people, and it's increasing despite the millions and millions and millions of pounds that have been spent on mental health. It's getting worse. The rates of depression, anxiety disorders, and addictions are getting worse. So what are we, doing wrong? And where should the government be putting their money, et cetera, et cetera? These are important questions. Women are more likely to be affected by common mental illness, for example. And I think it's fairly well established that women are more affected by relationship problems than men. And so they tend to get depressed about relationships not working. Men do as well, of course, but they are more likely to take their own life because men are more into problem solving. And that is a solution, you know, all right, I'm out of here. Jump in front of a train like poor Wally did. But it's not a very sensible solution. I'm sure you agree. Mental illness tends to start early. Antidepressant prescriptions have more than doubled in just the last 10 years because GPs aren't quite sure what to do with these people that are arriving on their doorstep. So that's really sort of the problem. Now, there's another massive problem, workplace stress. It causes agonies for people. If you do therapy with somebody and you say, ask them, as I've done in groups, what's the biggest stressor in your life? They'll say, my manager. things like that, you see. And it's well known that 2 out of 5 managers are social psychopaths. Well, that's the research shows that. And it's a problem. It is a problem because they don't take into account the bigger context of their decisions and their demands and their targets and so on. On top of the money lost in business and so on, mental health disorders are also the most common cause of people receiving benefits, which we taxpayers cough up for. And that's a massive bill. You know, our benefits bill is enormous. It's bankrupting the country. And 2/3 of these claimants were classified as having a depressive or anxiety disorder. Now, something that's always puzzled me is why do the universities and academics and the people that advise NICE guidelines, for example, and politicians, people in the media, why do they always bang on about CBT? And why has CBT, to try and become more effective, had to add things to it, like mindfulness or relaxation or visualization or so on, to calm people down before they can even think about their thinking? And I suddenly twigged that the real reason for that is it's your thinking that's wrong. We don't have to change society. We don't have to change the education system. We don't have to sort of help parents parent better. We don't have to do any of those things. And I think that's the main reason. Coupled with the fact now, though, that we know that CBT doesn't work. This is a quote from an article which is just about to be published. The Improving Access to Psychological Therapies, IAPT, program has come in for criticism on several counts. Millions have been spent on this, millions. Not least its creative accounting regarding outcomes. In other words, we're corrupt. Studies have allowed it to claim a 40% success rate, which is of course why journalists read that and they don't look any deeper. And so they, in their articles on well-being in the magazines and newspapers, they recommend CBT. Actually, that percentage of success only applied to the 12,000 people who stayed with CBT out of 130,000 who got fed up with it very quickly after one session and just left because it just wasn't appropriate. People don't go to see a therapist or a GP and say, there's something wrong with my thinking. They go with emotional problems, don't they? It's emotional. So it's a kind of a mad approach to it that got started back in the 1950s and 60s. And universities love it because it's very much doing therapy by numbers. So you can do research projects on it, you see. And all the early research projects were done comparing CBT with drug treatments. But of course, you know, if you're actually talking to somebody, it's going to be better than popping a pill. Anyway, some parts of the world, like for example Sweden, have abandoned CBT completely because they found that it hadn't made any difference to outcomes for depression and anxiety disorders. And then we have evidence-based theory. This is another thing politicians and academics and psychiatrists say, evidence-based theory. You know, it's got to be evidence-based. You've all heard this phrase. And I once de-traumatized a woman in front of a group of about 22, 23 medical people in a hospital, and she had a most terrible trauma. And I was showing people and demonstrating how you can de-traumatize people quickly, most people. And she had had the unfortunate experience, just as she was about to have a baby, to be stuck in a lift and nobody knew she was there, and all the lights were turned off and everybody went home. And of course she screamed and hollered, nobody heard her. And her husband was obviously very worried, where was she? And he gradually worked out she must still be in the building, that building where she'd gone. So he got the building opened up, and at 11 o'clock at night, there she was, in a terrible state, rushed off to hospital, had the baby. they rescued her, but that was so traumatic for her. When I asked for an example for some, has anybody got anything they want to deal with about trauma? She started rolling around the chair, absolutely in floods of tears and anxiety and so on. But the story doesn't end there, because she wanted more children. The first baby was born healthy and so on, thank goodness, despite what was happened there and then in the lift. But when she tried to have more children, after a few months, she kept losing them. It was really, really sad, because her amygdala, that part of the brain that's kind of like the guard, if you like, is always looking for danger, kept saying to her, this is too dangerous, you're going to get stuck in a lift. Because the amygdala is not very bright. It's very bright in what it does, but it's not terribly bright. And so she lost these children. So she only ever had one child, despite wanting more. So she was really traumatized by this. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is because some bright spark of a clinical psychologist in this group, I took this woman out at the end, and I said, the only way you're really going to know, well, I asked her, I said, how will you know this has worked? She said, if I can go in a lift again, without having a panic attack. So I haven't been able to go in a lift since this happened. So we went round the hospital, found a lift, and she was going up and down in the lift, beaming. She knew she'd changed. Something had changed. It's a very straightforward process. And we see this happen a lot. People change dramatically, very quickly, when you do this process. And this bright spark of a clinical psychologist said to me, that's all very well. I brought her back and said she's been up and down lifted, but where's your evidence? Challenging me, where's your evidence? And there she was. She'd been up and down in a lift. She was happy, she was smiling, she was clearly changed. Now, yet still they go on about evidence-based therapy without looking at what's in front of them. If any of you are a psychotherapist or clinical psychologist or whatever, you should be saying to yourself, what's in front of me? What's actually in front of me? Not working from theories. And I love this quote, which I will take the trouble to read out to you. I know you can all read, but I'm still going to read it out. The mistake, of course, is to have thought that peer review was any more than a crude means of discovering the acceptability, not the validity, of a new finding. Editors and scientists alike insist on the pivotal importance of peer review. We portray peer review to the public as a quasi-sacred process that helps to make science our most objective truth teller. But we know that the system of peer review is biased, unjust, unaccountable, incomplete, easily fixed, often insulting, usually ignorant, occasionally foolish, and frequently wrong. And I've found that to be true in many areas, but particularly in psychological intervention areas. There's a lot of corruption in science. So, where's my water? I often feel that the way we think about mental illness is as primitive as the way these people are thinking about it. Clearly, with hundreds of different models of psychotherapy, counselling, and I mean hundreds, there are. There's been autistic people have counted them all up, That's another one, put that on the list. There's need for a new organising idea. Because wherever there's uncertainty and people don't quite know what they're doing, in any field, doesn't matter what field, a new organising idea is needed to bring clarity, a wider perspective to the issues involved so that we can think about things differently and move on. And one of the most famous organising ideas is E equals mc squared, which brought all the science at the time together and then made sense of the relationship between mass, energy, and light in one formula so that people could think about everything differently. From that, we ended up with quantum science and your iPhones and all the rest of it. So an organising idea pulls information together so that the mind can make better sense of it. That's what we need. We need to make better sense of all this anxiety and depression and so on. And the richer the organising idea, the more true it's likely to be and the greater clarity of thought it brings. If an idea is true, it expands humanity's vision of reality. And it'll also have useful applications, just like E equals mc squared had useful applications. So the human givens approach that I'm going to start talking about now is an organising idea. That's what it is. And it makes psychological interventions more effective. It also makes education more effective when it's used in schools and understood by the teachers. We've had head teachers do our training. It also brings clarity to management in business, and diplomats have got interested in it. We're off to the EU at the beginning of June to give a workshop to diplomats who are in different troubled areas of the world, and we've been working for NGOs who are in conflict resolution in the Middle East and other South America and Africa, saying that you actually got to get back to the basics. So, the human givens approach, what we need to say to ourselves, what's the most basic thing we can say about a human being? What's the difference between a human being and a rock, for example? Anyone like to tell me? It should be pretty obvious. Well, I'll tell you, so you're all shy. But the main difference is that a human being is a life form. A rock isn't a life form, and a life form, all life forms, have to obey this law of all living things. It doesn't matter if you're a little weed or a bug or a bird or a human being. To survive, all living things must take in nourishment from the environment and continually rebuild and maintain themselves. So, and you know that's true. If ever my wife's a fantastic gardener, but if she finds a little plant that's trying to grow behind the shed in the dark and it's all white and weedy, she knows that it's not getting the nutriment it needs, but any sensible person would, of course. So she either moves the plants and tries to rescue it or puts it on the compost heap. She likes to save plants, but you can't always do it. But every living thing needs nutriment. So here we are, human beings. We come into the world with innate knowledge. Nature gives us, that's why we call it given, human givens, gives us this innate knowledge to allow us to connect up and get the needs for nourishment met. We see this as reflexes. I've recently had a new grandson, and you can see the reflexes kicking off straight away. They suckle, obviously, grass. Newborns can swim. They cry when they're hungry, and they've got the knowledge in them to do that. It's a form of knowledge. And they also know that they're the same as people. And they try and rapport build. Little babies are trying to build rapport, and you can see it in them. And they're also born to learn. You have to, all new knowledge that you gain has to be attached to knowledge you've already got. And the first knowledge we have is innate in us. And it's innate in animals, and it's innate in plants, and so on. There's this kind of knowledge of what they need, and they go and they seek it. And children and babies do. So, babies, long before they can talk, they're communicating, aren't they? Now, new knowledge then this is a fundamental principle. It always has to be added to existing knowledge. Always. That's the way the brain works. The capacity for culture, therefore, is part of our biology. It must be. We're born curious. And if every little baby, it's always putting things in its mouth, it's tasting, it's crawling about, and it's trying to learn about the environment. And that learning is an incredibly important instinct. Otherwise, we'd just stay as babies all our lives. So another thing we have a template inside us for is for language. All undamaged babies have the capacity to develop a language. And the time we do that is in the first few years. Up to the age of 9 or 10, we're very good at learning languages. In fact, if you're brought up by parents who speak different languages, or in 2 or 3 different cultures, small children can learn several languages perfectly easily, switch between them. And then at the age of about 10, 11, 12, the language learning template switches off. It's as if nature says, well, if you can't speak now, you're a goner. And that's why it's much harder to learn a language in your teens and further on than it is when you're little. And as, you know, in its wisdom, of course, our education system usually starts language learning when we're 11 or 12, which is when the template's already been switched off, and it's much harder. So 1-year-olds, they're participating in the culture. A family is a culture. So this is an important idea for you that may or may not be familiar, I don't know. Innate knowledge is laid down as instinctive templates. These are the givens. And they're programmed in the brain during the massive amounts of REM sleep in the neonate and first months of life. Now, there's evidence for this, because I wouldn't just say that without... Some of you will say, what's your evidence for that? Well, we know with animals that at birth, the amount of REM they're doing is directly correlated to how they've been, how the animal has arrived into the world. So I'll just give you an example of that. Guinea pigs, when they're born, they're little miniature guinea pigs, and they start running around eating grass almost immediately. I saw a foal being born a few years ago, and within half an hour, it was running around the field with its mother. It took about a quarter of an hour to get standing on its legs and taking its first steps, but very quickly, it was a little baby horse and behaving like a horse. And baby horses are fully developed and are doing very little programming for what it is to be a horse. Now, if you compare a guinea pig with a rat, rats are born blind and immobile. They're kind of little, almost slug-like looking things. Pretty horrible, really, we think. The rat mothers obviously don't think so, but that's how it is. But they mature quickly, and then their REM sleep, the programming aspect of their brains, reduces to 30% in a month. So human beings have a similar thing. We're being programmed to be a human being before we're born. That's the green represents the amount of REM sleep, programming sleep that babies do before they're born at 0. And then there's a lot of it goes on in the first year of life. You can see little babies, rapid eye movements going on. And it's a particular brain state in which we learn. So first we learn from our innate knowledge, which is what's happening before we're born. And then we start learning from the culture, the environment. And that learning involves the REM state as well. So, what are the human givens? Well, they are this innate knowledge. They're the templates we have that allow us to become human. And how do we know we've got these templates? Well, we have feelings. We have feelings about the physical and emotional needs that have to be met if we're going to fulfill our genetic potential. Physical needs are pretty obvious. We need air, we need food, we need water, space to move about, and so on. The emotional needs are more complex. I'll come to those in a minute. We also, nature didn't dump us here and say, get on with it. It gave us resources, like the ability to learn, like imagination, for example. And these things are guidance systems. You can look at them as guidance systems to help us get our needs met. So the human givens are innate needs and innate resources. So I'm just going to talk about the emotional needs themselves. And these are all well researched and so on, and if you're interested in references, then buy the Human Givens book, because there's, I think, 22 pages of references in the back of that. So, firstly, every newborn baby needs security. And we need a degree of security throughout our lives. We need safe territory. And you all know, I'm sure, that if a child doesn't feel it's safe at home, it doesn't do well. To put it mildly, it can be absolutely terrible for it. So it's an emotional need that we're safe. We also have a very strong need for control and autonomy. It's a kind of what happens to us in the world if everything that happens is out of our control, including our own bodies when we get ill, including psychopathic managers, including the government and so on, and the environment, the weather. It brings us down. We need to feel we can do something about things. It's kind of confirmation that we exist. We also have a need for status in the community. Why, you might think, why is the community so important? Well, why is that embedded in our genes, that need for community, to connect up to other people? It goes back hundreds of thousands of years when we were animals, more primitive than modern humans. The only way we could survive, I mean, you know, look at you, tasty meat for a hyena, because you've got nothing to defend yourself with. You know, you've got no claws, you haven't got big hairy hides that are half an inch thick, you can't run particularly fast. You're easy meat, and some archaeology, what do they call them? Anyway, people who study these things say that roughly half of our ancestors in those times were eaten alive. Now you can tell it from the way the bones have been chewed up. They were caught and eaten, as predators do to animals that are helpless. So the only way we survived was by being a group animal and developing techniques for scaring off the wild beasts. Because if you band together in a large group, you look to a hyena or a lion or something like a large animal, and they learned how to survive against predation. If you were cast out of the tribe, that was a death sentence, effectively, because one person can't do anything about the hyenas and the lions that are hunting them for very long. And you know this. A lot of you are mums and dads, and you may have seen in the school playground a child and the other children aren't playing with it. And it's ostracized, you know, for some reason or other. And it's obviously very upset and lonely and standing in the corner and so on. And your heart goes out to that child, and you go up to other children and say, oh, let them join in your games, you know. Well, there's nothing really, he's a nice person, really, why don't you let him play, etc. And that's an instinct coming from you, because you know in your heart of hearts that child thinks he's about to be eaten by a hyena. That's how it feels. So it's a very important aspect of humanity, is that we're group creatures, and we develop groupthink very easily. Again, that comes out, groupthink, which we always think is a terrible thing very often, which it is, but it's also a very good thing. It evolved because human beings had to cooperate and think about how best to survive in this group and what's needed. So groupthink evolved as well. Privacy to reflect and consolidate experience. If you don't have the time to be on your own a little bit, in safety obviously, and think and let your ego fall away so that you can be reflective about your life, the people around you, the people you love, the people, what you want to do, you know, and ask the big questions even, you know, what's consciousness? Why are we here at all? Those things. You can only do that if you have privacy. You consolidate your learning in those moments. It's fundamental that we need to exchange attention. We need to give attention to others and receive attention from others gracefully and in civilized ways. That's how a family develops. A good family, you'll see good exchange of attention between the parents and the children and the siblings and so on. They will be modelling the people who are giving them attention and learning how to be a complete human being. And attention is fascinating because, as you all know, I'm sure, the world now is harvesting attention through social media and those wretched little things we all hold in our hands, and harvesting our attention to sell us stuff, basically. But we come into every new day with a limited amount of attention energy. And if we waste it, we don't develop as human beings. And it's being wasted and stolen from us by entertainment, by social media, by people selling us stuff and so on. That attention focus is no longer under our control. We don't realise it, but it isn't when we behave like that. So we need attention to be able to focus our attention in intelligent ways. So we need emotional connection to others. It's very important to have friends, love and intimacy in your life if you can get it. Intimacy doesn't automatically mean sex, incidentally, but somebody you can be close to and reveal yourself to when you need to, and you can share things with them. I'm not saying you don't need sex, it's jolly good, but learning, achievement and competence. If we don't achieve things, people who don't achieve things develop what's popularly called low self-esteem. You've all heard people say, oh, you know, she suffers from low self-esteem. But you take that girl who suffers from low self-esteem out into the country, for example, and teach her to ride a horse, and suddenly she doesn't have low self-esteem. And this is the basis on which all sort of outward bound courses and apprenticeship systems and so on. And people learn new things. They feel much better about themselves. We have to achieve and we have to feel competent. If we don't feel competent, we go downhill. And last but not least, we need meaning in our lives. So much work nowadays is meaningless. You just feel you're working for the system. You're working to make other people lots of money. The work is boring, etc., etc. Now, meaning comes in three main ways. It makes suffering tolerable, and each of these three ways involves us being stretched, not stressed, but stretched. There's a horrible fashion I've seen on TED Talks where some Americans are saying there's good stress and bad stress. This is dumbing us down. That's just nonsense. Stress, if you see someone who's really stressed, they'll be crying, they'll be in a terrible state. They're really stressed, they won't be able to talk properly. But someone who's stretched has problems to solve. We need problems. We need to be stretched. And they're good for us. But it's only when people feel they can't do anything about the problems they face that they become stressed. So what are these three ways? By being needed ourselves. If you're raising a family, or you're teaching children, or you're caring in the caring professions, working in a team, in a business, whatever you're doing, helping in the community, that is intrinsically meaningful. It's a reason to get up in the morning. The second reason is learning. Learning is intrinsically meaningful. Becoming better at a craft or at music, practicing science or obtaining professional qualifications, sport, all those things. If you're learning to do things better, that is intrinsically meaningful. Third, by being connected to some way with ideas that are bigger than your ego. And it's philosophical, or political, or religious, spiritual, which is different from religion, obviously. That feeling of connection to something beyond yourself is intrinsically meaningful to many, many people. So the fundamental principle here is that a person cannot develop a mental illness when their innate emotional needs are met in balanced ways, and I stress the balance. Because there they are again, the needs. Obviously, there has to be balance. I mean, if you are so security obsessed, you wouldn't take any risks. Human beings have to take risks. You wouldn't have business. You wouldn't generate wealth. You wouldn't start a relationship, for example, unless you took a risk. You have to take risks. So it's a question of balance. You need to be secure, but not so secure that you won't go out. We need volition and a sense that we're in control. But do you know those people who are control freaks? I mean, they are awful people to work for or to live with. And we, you know, my wife and I know somebody who is a complete and utter control freak over her husband. And it's the most horrible thing to see. It's very upsetting for those that watch it. Status. We need status. It's fundamental because it's part of this being recognized in the community. The community has to value you. So you need a degree of status. Otherwise you'll get kicked out of the tribe and eaten by hyenas. But that doesn't mean to say we have to be delusional. Do you remember a few years ago there was a new Labour minister and she got a parking ticket and she rushed up to the parking attendant, meter man, and said, "Don't you know who I am?" Now what did that tell you about her? She was delusional. You know, she has to obey the law like everybody else. So we need a degree of status, but you know, it mustn't get out of control. Now, you've all met, I'm sure, very needy people. They want attention. They come up to you and you know they're not interested in what you're saying. They just want you to give them attention. And very quickly they start to drain the life force out of you. Have you met people like that? I'm sure you have lots of minimal nods around the room. You know what I'm talking about. They're awful. They're just not exchanging attention. They're just taking all the time. And we need to feel emotional connection to other people. But if you're so obsessed with your emotional connection, you could miss the bigger picture. An example I give of that is I was once driving down the motorway just after the big financial crash of some years ago now. And this musician I was driving with was a lovely chap, obsessed with his family and his music. We just talk about his family and his music all the time. So to kind of break the monotony of this conversation, which I was enjoying, but I just said, what do you think about this financial crash? And this was about 18 months after the crash. And he said, "What financial crash?" He just never read a paper, never heard the news, never discussed things other than his family and his music. So he was missing something. Because, as we all know, financial crashes, political situations impact on us. Wars impact on us. You mustn't become so obsessional about your connection to the community that you neglect your family or yourself. So you find that there are people that travel around the country following their football team, never see their family at the weekends because they're out and about with their football all the time. They're connected to the football community, but they're missing out on other needs that they need to get fulfilled for themselves and other people. We don't want to become isolationists and a hermit. We need a bit of privacy, but you know, within reason. And we need to achieve things and develop a sense of competence. But what you expect of that has to be realistic. There are some people, including me, who will never be ballet dancers. You know, it just doesn't fit with that aspiration. And again, you shouldn't become obsessed about your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, and so on. They may give you a sense that you're involved in something meaningful, but you'll never see the other point of view if you do that. So the origin of stress then is unmet needs. And they're caused by the environment, what it's not giving you to help you meet your needs. And it's only when you feel incapable of doing anything about the pressures that are preventing us from getting our emotional needs met that we begin to feel trapped and experience stress. And this will be true of all your patients, those of you that are therapists of some sort. Here's another little idea. Actually, I haven't got time to go on this. I've got a strict time limit, haven't I? I'll run through it very quickly. You can always look it up. Chitextia, it's from the Latin caecus, meaning blindness, and contextus, meaning context. It's a very useful way of thinking about why it is so people seem incapable of seeing the context or the impact of their behaviour on others. The human beings, when they're well developed, can see the implication of things. They can hold multiple variables information in their heads. People on the autistic spectrum, from the most severely autistic to the high-functioning Asperger people, can't do that. And it causes problems. So those people, and we can all be a bit contextic at times. For example, when we're highly emotional, we all become context blind. But these people are like it all the time. And they resort to two main mental modus operandi, which is straight line logical thinking, sort of the left-brained autistic types, for example, or thinking by random associations. You know, you can talk to somebody and then their mind will go off and talk about something else and then something else, and you know, their brain is just pattern matching to any random thought that comes into their head. So this leads us to organisational chitextia. It's a very useful term, this, because it explains so much about the way some lousy companies are operating and the way government departments operate. So it's what happens when chitextic people are largely oblivious of the effect of their actions on the lives of those impacted upon. Chitextic managers are those that typically confine themselves to the obvious, visible effect of their management policies and the actions that derive from them, like targets, bottom line, the amount of money they personally gain, etc. By contrast, a healthy organisation would take into account both the obvious visible effects and also the invisible effects. You know, what would be the effect if we did this on the environment, for example? So it generates chaos, chitextia, context blindness, unnecessary complexity. When you see a lot of bureaucracy, you're looking at a lot of chitextia. We've had the occasion to treat head teachers. Head teachers, not all of them, there's some brilliant head teachers, but there's quite a lot of them who are autistic, Aspergery, because they love tick boxes. They love rules and regulations, and they think that's how it should be done. And of course, their employers are happy with that because they keep getting all these reports with ticks in boxes on them. Target obsession disorder, a very real disorder, TOD it's known as in the trade. You can see people who are just obsessed with targets but not stepping back and looking at the impact of those targets on other people. And you see avoidance behaviours, like people are so fed up they take sick days off when they're not really sick, or they won't take responsibility for their actions. And all sorts of unintended consequences. So vital decisions don't get made, complacency, procrastination, opportunities lost, etc. Some of these people are empire building. You know, they think, oh, if I keep ticking boxes, you know, I'll get more and more money. My salary will go up. I'll get staff stress. People in those kind of environments suffer a lot, as we already said. The rising rates of mental illness and stress. And you get environmental harm done by companies that just pump out rubbish into the rivers and so on. And damage to the wider community, because chitextic people are preventing others from getting their innate needs met, being unrealistic. So we have this mental health continuum. If you're healthy, you're enjoying relationships. Relationships are really important. You're working, you're doing something, you're not just lying around on a sofa all day. You're overcoming difficulties and solving problems. The brain needs problems. This is ancient knowledge, and there's a lovely old proverb. I love proverbs, sometimes encapsulate things, but this may not work in London, but it works in agricultural communities, and it comes, I think, from the Middle East or North Africa, and it says, if you've got no problems, buy a goat. then you'll have problems. And the people who came up with that knew that it's important to have problems because your brain is evolved to solve problems. So, you're feeling overwhelmed, and this is unhealthy. You can't think straight. Stressed people can't think straight, they're chitextic in that state. Poor sleep, unable to function normally and exhibiting a variety of uncomfortable systems. Now, it's innate needs that motivate everything. People go on about motivation. It's not about money and this, that, and the other. It's about getting aspects of your needs met. That's what motivates people to do anything. Curiosity, for example, is a motivator and connected to learning. And these innate needs are really important for our careers, for our education, for our children's education, and they drive us to build these relationships and do all the things we want to do, and also search with those people who are interested for greater meaning in their lives. So what stops innate needs being met? Well, three main reasons. The environment itself is sick and it's preventing people from getting their needs met. So for example, a sick environment in work would be if you're being bullied by a manager. That is a very sick. If there's domestic violence going on in a home, that's a very sick environment. And it's stopping people getting their needs met. It's not just physical violence, it's also emotional violence that goes on. Maybe the person has been very poorly brought up and they don't know how to operate their internal guidance systems to get their needs met. A simple example of that is if children haven't been properly socialised by their parents and don't mix well with other children, or they're obsessed, I want all the time. And the innate guidance system can be damaged in some way, as it would be with, for example, people born with autism, people who've had damage to their brain through accidents and car crashes or whatever, or through drugs or alcohol, where there's damage there, and so that's preventing them getting their needs met. It's quite serious, and also damage by prescription drugs. So, because we're driven by nature to get our innate emotional needs met, if we can't do so in healthy ways, we will try and do so in less healthy ways. And an example of that is, there's been a lot of knife crimes and gang crimes in London, I read. And the thing is, nature's driving every child to connect up to the community. But if the community of the street of their peers is a gang, they're going to connect up to that gang. Or if their communities are all taking drugs, they'll connect up to that community. And there's not an awful lot you can do about it, except make sure that those children have better people to connect up to. That's what good parenting's about, being selective about who the children mix with. So there's physiological reasons. Misuse of innate resources. For example, misuse of imagination. The classic of that, which we'll come to later, is in depression. Harmful conditioning. People having useless expectation, like the world owes me a living. I shouldn't have to work. Why should I take responsibility? I once saw on television, a 16-year-old girl got herself pregnant, and she was in one of these sort of political, all people in the audience like this, and she was brought up on the platform, the microphone given to her, and she said, I think it's absolutely disgusting that I'm pregnant, I'm going to have a baby, and the government won't give me a house. She didn't want a flat or anything. She was really indignant. I should just be given this. And she's contributed absolutely nothing to the community at that point in her life. And yet she just had this expectation. It's a terrible thing. We've got to be realistic. Being traumatized. So there's all kinds of little traumas and big ones as well, PTSD and so on. And they're all ways of faulty pattern matching to events now. So for example, if you in a shooting incident and you hear a car backfire, you could have a panic attack and get in a terrible state, but it's a faulty pattern match because you're not being shot at again. It's just a car going past that needs a bit of service. Being overwhelmed by present events, we're talking about stress, addiction behaviours, forms of greed, in other words. Or they can be locked in a depressed, anxious or angry trance state. Any emotional state that stays with you is a trance state. Depression is a trance state. Anger is a trance state. And these states are what psychotherapists have to work with. But you have to understand what a trance is to work with them successfully. So, just quickly, we've got these various resources I mentioned. I'll just run through them quickly. The ability to learn, long-term memory, imagination, which can allow us to focus our attention away from our emotions so that we can be more objective. The ability to understand the world through metaphor. The brain is a metaphorical pattern-matching organ. All the time, when people are trying to explain something to somebody else, they say, it's a bit like. They say, it's like this, it's like that. And that's why we love stories so much. Stories are really important because stories contain patterns, not facts, patterns. And those patterns help us understand things. That's why it's really, really important that children get a rich marination in stories, good stories. And observing self. Some people have this ability to be aware of their own awareness and sort of step out of themselves, as it were, and see themselves more objectively. We have this ability, which is another resource, to empathize and connect with others. It's a need, but it's also an ability. Human beings are good at it. Most human beings are. And we have a rational mind that can check out them. We can think about, when our calm states, we can think about our emotional reactions and apologize for things we've done or said, for example. And lastly but not least, we have a dreaming brain, a brain that dreams. And it dreams in metaphor, in stories. So, the human givens approach takes into, I'm going to give you a break in a minute, just for a loo break or something. I've been told I've got to do that. The human givens approach takes into account the following: strong emotions, focus and lock attention. I don't know what that 4 is doing there, but, you know, technology. We have a brain. We've got a sort of more right and a more left side to the brain, but we've also got a central brain, and the brain is incredibly complex, as you know. But different parts of the brain specialize in different things. And as they develop, they become gendered. On average, men and women handle emotions differently, for example. We learn by repeating stuff. But also, change can come about suddenly. You all know the expression, oh, the penny dropped. I suddenly got what they're talking about. And the other thing is that human beings need a long maturation period compared to other animals. We do. I watched a program about Neanderthals the other day. They think Neanderthals were sort of like our 16-year-olds when they're about 8. Modern humans seem to need a much longer learning period. Now, teachers know this. And for a long time, teachers collect examples that show you that children and adolescents haven't quite seen the bigger picture yet. They haven't finished learning. And they're not mature enough. And so they collected what used to be called howlers. And there's wonderful books, collections of children's howlers, which I love. I mean, this is one, for example, in an exam, which is, you can't fault the child for saying that, can you? But we all know that's not what the question was hoping for. I've got another one here. The sort of thing children say because they haven't got enough information. As you like those, I'm going to give you 2 or 3 more, and then we'll have a break. These are from essays that children have written. To be a good nurse, you must be absolutely sterile. Doctors say fatal diseases are the worst. Newspapers are useful for reporting calamities, such as deaths and marriages. And inhibition is like an exhibition, only indoors. That one's for the Freudians amongst you. The Oedipus complex means liking your mother as if she were a normal woman. These have all been taken from children's essays. Beethoven had 8 children and he practiced in the attic on a spinster. The musicians among you will know it's meant to be spinet. It's a keyboard instrument. The Matterhorn was a horn blown by the ancients when anything was the matter. Anyway, where's Neil? Well, now, how does nature keep us sane is what I'm going to be talking about now. And basically, one of the main mechanisms nature evolved in animals and us is the dreaming process. So I'm just going to talk quickly about dreaming. Because every time we go to sleep, about 20%, 25% of our time is spent in REM sleep and we're dreaming. And the rest of the time we're in slow wave sleep, which is recuperative sleep, very important. That's where cells are reinforced, the immune system is boosted, sugars are added to the neurons, etc., which is why we wake up feeling refreshed. So sleep is absolutely critical to mental health and general well-being, as we all know. But it can go wrong, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. Now, firstly, every arousal of the autonomic nervous system is in actual fact better thought of as an expectation. And every expectation has an emotion attached to it. That's the situation. It has an emotion attached to it. So the autonomic nervous system, as you know, made up of the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is the arousal part of it. An expectation creates an arousal. And when you have to de-arouse that, God, I'm losing my voice, I'm sorry, you have to take action. And you take action, and it de-arouses. So that's what happens with the autonomic nervous system. Now, if you don't take action, that arousal is still trapped, as it were, in the autonomic nervous system, the ANS, and it has to be deactivated. And the deactivation happens in dreams. Now, some of you will have cats and dogs, and you will have seen your pets. When you're paralyzed, when you're dreaming, you're paralyzed. The anti-gravity muscles are paralyzed anyway, but your fingers and toes will be moving. And if those of you, when you've noticed your cats and dogs dreaming, will see fingers and toes sort of moving a little bit, but the rest of their body is motionless. Michel Youvet, a French scientist, did a lot of work on this. Just some fascinating experiments, actually, that showed that this dreaming process is actually in mammals and has been there since time immemorial, as far as we know. You know, it must have been to de-arouse arousals that hadn't been dealt with by taking action. He had I don't know if I've got time to tell you all this, but I will tell you anyway. And if I overrun, I'm sorry. So I want to leave time for questions. The experiment he did was he ablated the cells that cause the paralysis in REM sleep, and he used cats for this. I think he also did it with dogs later. And then he created an expectation. He had a huge cage, and where the cat was, when he did these with lots of cats, because he repeated the experiment. So when they were in there and they were awake, he released a mouse into the cage, but he put lots of holes for the mouse to escape through. So the cats never caught the mouse, but they had this hunting arousal in them, this hunting instinct. So the autonomic nervous system was working, and they didn't catch the mouse. And what happened? They went to sleep, but because the paralysis had been ablated, when they went into the REM state of sleep, they leapt up and caught an imaginary mouse. So we can't ask it, was that a mouse? But it was a metaphorical mouse because it wasn't a real mouse, and played with it and went back to sleep again, happy as Larry. But all the time it was doing that, it was asleep. So we know this is a mammalian thing. So what's dreaming doing for us? Well, they metaphorically translate these waking expectations. So everything in a dream is an expectation spelt out in a metaphor. But it's only emotional expectations that are not acted upon during the day that become dreams at night. And dreams deactivate the emotional arousal, and that frees the brain up. If we were to, people say, well, why didn't you dream about the actual mouse or the actual incident or the actual person? Why are you saying this person is a metaphor for that person? So, for example, a lot of people might say, oh, I had a dream about school. But it's a long time since you've been at school. And the metaphor would be that at school you had a bullying teacher and now you've got a bullying manager. I'm sorry if I'm mentioning bullying managers a lot. I hope there's no managers here. But the metaphor is that is the bullying teacher that you go back to. I'll give you an example. A dream, a repetitive dream this woman was having. And she said, I realise now, listening to you, that what this is all about. But for a long time, for about 2 years, I've been having this dream quite often. And that is 1066 and the Norman invasion. And all these Normans are firing arrows at me, and I'm getting really irritated having to dodge these wretched arrows from the invaders, you see. And she said, but I suddenly realised what it's all about. This chap had been making approaches to her, and she didn't want to have anything to do with him, and it was getting really irritating. But his name was Norman. Cupid's arrows, you see. He fancied her, but she didn't fancy him. So the mental health continuum. Needs are met well, our dreams are coping well. And the REM state is functioning normally. It's clearly not functioning normally in psychosis or in depression, but we'll come to that in a minute. So that's great, isn't it? And then you have innate emotional needs not met. And you get stressed, and you get all the things, anxiety, depression, psychosis, and develop other problems perhaps. And the REM state in those states is intensely overactive. If you want to find out more about dreams, that's a book I wrote with Joe Griffin. Now, another thing we need to say is that we see everything around us through pattern matching. The brain pattern matches all the time to check, is this something I need to be aware of, or afraid of, or learn about? All the time there's this pattern matching happening. And we're not aware of it. Every pattern match is tagged with an emotion, and it's a metaphorical process. In dreams, the reason we don't dream about actual people, we dream people who are standing in for them, metaphorically, is because if we got our dream life muddled up with our waking reality, we will be psychotic, which is what psychosis is, as we write about in our book. So this pattern match can never be exact. So we are an animal that's always generalizing. We can't help it, because our brains can't encompass the whole of the world or the universe or everyone we're likely to meet. So we generalize all the time. We stereotype. We pattern match what we're, and from those pattern matches come expectations. And it's a given. The brain works by pattern matching. This has now been written about quite extensively. I mean, Steven Pinker said, well, can you sum up how the brain works in 5 words or 6 words. And he said, yes, neurons fire in patterns, and they do. So the human givens approach operates from the APET model, which derives from how the brain works. Now, the first thing is that the A in APET, like the A in cognitive behavioral therapy, stands for activating agent. It's a bit jargony, but that's the way it goes. It's so well established, we can't avoid it. So stuff happens, in other words. And the brain, first thing it does is pattern matches. It pattern matches to whatever's going on. Is this something I know about or don't know about? Is this likely to be a threat, or is this likely to be good for me? Whatever. But pattern matches are going on to similar experiences you've had. And then those pattern matches are tagged with emotions. And we do think about things sometimes. Most of the time we ruminate. We don't really think in a sort of careful way. We're ruminating. But so that's what the APET's all about. So there's a human function curve related to innate needs, how well we're functioning and the pressure we're under. So if you're feeling disconnected from life, stressed out, you're going to be bored, anxious and depressed. And their needs aren't being met. But if you're stretched and living life to the full, that's exhilarating, it's exciting. We are designed to be stretched and enjoy doing what we're doing. The sense, therefore, sweeps into us that life has meaning and purpose. Our needs are being met well. But things can go wrong, and we can have so much happening that we get what Dr. Peter Nixon once called the stress hump when he was talking about what happens with heart attacks. Stress hump. And that's when the REM state mechanism is put under increased pressure. And you get all the usual things, losing control, you feel that. And you start to get anxious, angry, depressed, or develop addictive behaviors or whatever. Needs aren't met big time. It's very exhausting. You can develop other health problems and even have a complete and total breakdown. So that's the human function curve, which is quite useful. And that's the area of life we should be trying to maintain a healthy balance with the world in. So, when I was doing a lot of therapy, which I don't do now, but when I was, if someone was referred to me from a GP with depression, I was much happier than because depression, as good psychotherapists will tell you, is one of the easiest things to treat, usually. And because, there's a methodology to it. So I'm just going to quickly talk about depression because it's so common. In fact, it's the most common psychological disorder presenting in the Western world, and it's massively on the increase, which, for reasons we talked about earlier. It's expected that half of all women and a quarter of all men will suffer from a major depression in their life. And it's the biggest single cause for taking time off work. It's very strongly correlated with back pain, for example. Some more facts to think about. Depressed people are highly emotional. Depression is a strong emotion. We know this from the amount of cortisol in a depressed person's blood. They do a lot of what psychologists call negative rumination, but what you and I and all sensible people should call is worrying. That's what it is. It's worry. We all know what worrying is. You have to think twice about negative rumination, but you have to remember psychologists are always trying to make out they're more scientific, so they use longer words. So they're worrying. They typically suffer from insomnia and other sleep disorders, including waking up exhausted and being unable to activate or motivate themselves. You will never find a depressed person who doesn't wake up feeling exhausted. It's just so common to them. They wake up exhausted. And they don't know why. And that gives them something else to worry about, doesn't it? Because they know they shouldn't feel like that. Because they may have been in bed for 8-9 hours, but they're still exhausted. It's not right. When depressed people are woken at the beginning of REM sleep periods, in other words, their REM sleep periods are shortened, it's been shown that mood lifts. This has only been shown in sleep laboratories, but their mood does lift when the amount of REM sleep they get is shortened. So here's the cycle of depression. One or more emotional need is not being met. So they start to worry about it. They can start to get anxious. Anxiety and depression go hand in hand. So they get anxious because the worrying is the need's not being met. It's work. I don't know what it is. Hang on, I'm going to have a drink of water. My brain stopped. I'm worrying about it now. So emotional needs aren't being met, and they start to worry, and they don't take action. Worrying is, as you know, all emotional arousal makes us stupid. Even falling in love makes us stupid a bit. This is why some women end up marrying psychopaths. They were so in love with the charm of the person, they didn't look at the bigger picture. So they get emotionally aroused, and their thinking is catastrophic, all or nothing thinking. And that's a real problem for them because they're not solving their problems in the environment. And if they're not solving their problems in the environment, taking action, the autonomic nervous system will have to dream. And every little worry they've had all day long, and then you ask a depressed person, are you worrying about anything? They'll say things like, I've had people say, I could worry for Britain, Well, we don't want you to do that, but they say things like that. Their sleep balance is disturbed. Intense, prolonged dreaming every night is what they're getting. They're getting far too much REM state, particularly in the early stages of sleep, and it's more intense and longer periods of it, and much less slow wave sleep. And it's the slow wave sleep that refreshes you, and recharges the batteries, as it were, to use a metaphor. So they wake up exhausted and lacking in motivation. Now, the lacking in motivation is interesting. To motivate yourself to do anything, you've got to have spare attention energy to focus yourself on getting the kids off to school and making your breakfast even. If you haven't got that in you, that attention capacity, and because it's all been drained up whilst you've been drained out of you by dreaming, you can't motivate yourself to do anything. Oh, I'm not going to bother to go to work today. Somebody else will have to do it. You can't motivate yourself to put the bins out even, So things start to go wrong. It's not just the exhaustion, it's also the lack of motivation that goes with it. So this is a cycle that people get into. And it's because it's emotional, it's a trance state, because emotions generate trances in us. And that cycle continues until the worrying stops and dreaming's normalized. So it's very simple. And the thing is, once you've calmed a depressed person down and you explain it to them, they nearly all get it. They will all say, yeah, I do worry. So then the therapy is, well, what are you worrying about? You get specific. Because they've come, if you're a therapist, they've come to borrow your brain for a bit. You don't say, like some schools of therapy say, now what do you think? I can't think, So you help them. You actually go in and do some practical work with them. So they might be worrying about their finances or their relationship or their children, the way they're behaving at school or whatever. You help them, you calm them down and help them think clearly again, and then help them take action. And there's ways we do that in Human Givens approach. So that book has sold tens and tens of thousands, and we get lots of emails from people saying it stopped them committing suicide and things. Now, just a brief note about this. Psychobabble, as you know, there's a psychobabble. In any field where there's confusion, you get jargon and psychobabble or other types of babble, so that you don't know what people are talking about really. Most ordinary people don't. So just, if you hear a lot of psychobabble, be aware. Be aware there's something going on here that's not very healthy. So I'm just going to talk about another word that keeps coming up when you get involved in psychotherapy, and that's abstract words, what are called in the trade nominalizations. Now, we all know that words are symbols, and we tend to forget this. We just use them and we assume they're kind of about truth directly, but they're not. They're kind of a bridge to truth, but they're not truth. So, you know, the word water, it's not water, is it? Can't be. This is an ancient philosophical problem, but the brain has become incredibly adept at using words as mental shorthand, and they help us think, but sometimes they stop us thinking. And there's a type of word, normalizations, that can be dangerous. What happens with normalization is we can get, I'll let you read that. I'll give you an example. I want you all to be a little psychotic for a moment. Just for a moment, though. I'm sure there's good therapists in the audience that can help you. I want you to imagine I'm a patient, but also the therapist. So as a therapist, I'm going to say, well, what brings you here? And the patient says, well, my GP said I should come and see you. What exactly is the problem? Well, the GP said I've got depression, and perhaps counselling could help. Oh, I see. Well, tell me about it. Well, you know, my life's a disaster, really. I get up in the morning and there's like this black cloud following me around, and it's all doom and gloom, you know. I haven't had any success in my life. Certainly got no love in my life. Nobody cares. I don't even think the doctor gets it. And it goes on like that. God, you all look depressed already. See, what happens is when you use words like counselling, depression, joy, love, they're all normalizations, they're abstract terms. And as a therapist, because we pattern match what those words mean to us, you know, we all experience bad days, so you'll be pattern matching to emotions when you've experienced bad times. And is anyone in this room who's never had a bad day? No hands are going up. I'll inform you at the front. None of them have put their hands up. We've all had bad times. Everybody has. Illnesses, friends and relatives die, redundancies, whatever. And that when patients talk to, that's why therapists incidentally get burnout, because they're getting these emotions coming across them because their brain is pattern matching to abstract words. It's a real problem, actually. But we talk about that in our diploma course. So if a patient thinks and talks in abstractions, they're going to feel passive about life and helpless. And they're going to affect the people around them. Now, when you see someone's depressed, you want to help them. It's natural in human beings to try and help other people. But if they keep staying depressed, after a while you'll see people backing off of them. That's what we have to do to protect ourselves, because they're bringing us down, which is sad. But that's why we need to understand depression and how to go about lifting it. So, it always means that essential information is being deleted, namely precisely who's doing precisely what to precisely whom and why. You're not getting concrete information out of people when they're talking like that. And these normalizations are used for three main reasons: to hide ignorance, this is why politicians use normalizations all the time, and to protect territory, and to deceive and manipulate. Advertisers use them all the time. You imagine, vote for change, freedom and hope. You know, this is the Obama and Corbyn and Donald Trump and all that sort of thing. All these people, they talk in these kind of terms. But change means something different to every person in the room. If a politician says, you know, I'm going to bring change, what change? You know, one person wants a divorce, somebody else wants to move into a new house, somebody else wants a nice holiday, somebody else wants a job. They've all got different changes they want in their lives. But because that creates a positive emotion in people, yes, but the politician can't give you any of that. Freedom. Does that mean freedom for psychopaths? I hope not. So, we have to think about words and the way we use them. Vote for doom, gloom and endless pain. You'd probably get in, actually, somebody like this, using that as a slogan. So, I'm going to give some time for questions, so I'll quickly run through this. If you're depressed or one of your relatives is, what do you look for in a psychotherapist or counsellor? You have to be, the person has to be empathetic and able to build rapport quickly. Goes without saying, like a good salesman can. You think, well, that's obvious, but I once overheard a psychoanalyst say, oh no, it takes 2 years to get into a deep rapport with somebody so that you can begin the deep work. Well, you couldn't sell a car like that, could you? It's just absurd. People are very good at building rapport. That's if you sincerely are interested in another person and that person picks up your sincerity. You've got to have a good understanding of innate needs, and I hope that's obvious by now. You've got to understand depression, really understand it, and how to go about lifting it. And there are techniques that we use to do that quickly. Help immediately with anxiety problems, including trauma, PTSD of course, and other fear-related symptoms such as OCD. You've got to be prepared to give advice if needed or asked for. There was a school of counselling, I don't know if it's still going, where they say, oh, counselling isn't advice giving. Well, that's ridiculous. The person can't think straight. And what should I do? Well, what you do, you give them a menu of different things they can do. And then they've got the volition to choose. So they do need advice. People do need advice. Obviously won't use jargon or psychobabble, and won't tell you, like some people used to say, oh, therapy, you're going on a long and painful journey with me. Oh, great, thanks. I don't want to do that. I want to feel better. I want to get on with my life. Will not dwell unduly on the past. The past can be important. Of course it is. It's hugely important. But if you just dwell on it all the time, your focus, your attention is in the wrong area. And you be supportive of people when difficult feelings emerge, as they do. If people have bottled up stuff, you might get tears and all the rest of it. So, and you just let them, cry for 5 or 10 minutes, calm down, and then you do some work with them. You don't encourage them to cry. Know how to teach you to relax deeply. It's really important to relax people. They can't think straight if they're not relaxed. None of us can. And you've got to be able to assist people to develop their social skills. And there's ways of doing this too, very simple ways, so they can get their needs for connection to other people met. And you've got to be able to draw on life's resources, their own life resources. Be considerate of the effects of therapy or counselling on the people close to you. If somebody's, say, agoraphobic, but all the family have been rallying around for years because they won't go out, they're doing their shopping for them and so on. Some of those people might like being a carer, and they'll get very upset if the person doesn't need them anymore for that role. So all sorts of strange things can happen. Help you think about problems in more empowering ways. Use lots of different techniques, but often ask you to do things between sessions. In other words, you set tasks. But we have ways of making sure people do those tasks as well. Take as few sessions as possible. If you think of the innate need, people want control over their lives. If you go on and on and on, and they start saying, oh, I'll have to ask my therapist if I can go on holiday, and that sort of thing. I've heard that. That's wrong. It's just abusive. People want to get control back, so you do keep the therapy as brief as possible. Some people, of course, they're going to need attention all their lives, like autistic people. They need, they need a different type of help. But most people, the vast majority, don't have those kind of problems. And you're going to be increasing self-confidence in people straight away after every consultation, after the very first consultation. And there's ways of doing that as well. I just wish I had all day and I could go into some of the methodology. So why human givens therapy? Well, it builds on the best of what's gone before, the best from other types of therapies. It's aligned to what science is discovering about the brain and the mind-body system and what motivates people, i.e. the human givens. And it operates out of this large organising idea. If you don't have a large organising idea like this, you can't really make progress in psychotherapy or in psychological interventions. Just as physicists couldn't make progress, the sort of progress they have made, until Einstein came up with his E equals mc squared. So we focus on unmet innate emotional needs, because that's where the problem will lie with anybody. And we ensure clients feel better after every session and that change is measurable. We have a really big database now where the clients measure their improvements. It's very useful. It's as brief as possible to encourage volition. I've already said that, repeating myself. We use skills that are concrete, that you could all learn quite quickly. You don't need to do 3-year masters or long degree courses. These are practical skills. And you see people doing therapy on our courses with other people, with real patients. It's safe, and it doesn't inculcate ideological beliefs into patients about their symptoms. So, for example, do you remember there was a false memory syndrome that started up in the 1970s, 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s? A terrible thing. The therapists would say to people, oh, the reason you've got this problem is because you were probably sexually abused when you were a child. Now, real sexual abuse is a terrible thing, but to start suggesting it to people, given in the fact that human beings are immeasurably susceptible to suggestion, we are, is a wicked thing. I put the first major conference on this subject in 1994 at the Royal Society of Medicine, because I could see what was happening. Families were being broken up by these careless, ignorant therapists who'd got into this belief system that, there was, I won't go on about it. It uses the patient's innate resources, such as their memory, imagination, and problem-solving abilities, plus their life resources to help them. Their life resources are the emotions attached to things that they've successfully done, like pass the driving test or got 8 O-levels or whatever it is. They don't have O-levels now, do they? So here's some guidelines. The person who came up to me in the break talking about getting people at a higher level in society to think about these ideas. Plans for promoting well-being should arise from a sound knowledge of what reality requires, not from abstract aspirations, idealistic dogma, or political expediency. Think, work in tune with nature, not against her. Always remember that any policy, health, educational, social, etc., that interferes with children or adults getting their innate needs met in healthy, balanced ways will always raise stress levels and be counterproductive in the long runs. If any of you feel stressed in your work, it's because these kind of things are not being honoured. We shouldn't limit ourselves, however. We really shouldn't. To regard human well-being as the highest possible achievement of humanity limits us. Getting our needs met is just what nature gave us anyway. It gave us this whole pattern, these templates in us. That's just the starting point. Human beings are capable of so much more. We really can explore the universe in ways that most people don't even think about, but we can. And we can develop ourselves to be amazing creatures. So this is a quote from someone who's dead now, who I used to know. The desire for human well-being is the minimum, not the maximum duty of humanity. And I think it's time for questions.
Thank you.
Right. Anybody got any questions?
Yeah, what you talk about seems so similar to coaching.
Yeah.
So, if you think about all that safe space, building rapport,
It is, yeah.
looking at evidence, using the past to move forward. So it does sound...
It is. A lot of coaches have done our courses, and a lot of people are actually working in business, helping them create better teams and teaching leadership skills and that sort of thing. And you're absolutely right. But it's also important in diplomacy and in schools. And one of the saddest things I heard in a school, I was doing a talk like this about metaphors and stories and so on. And a woman there had just come from a secondary school. And this was a secure school I was in, for very disturbed children. And she was telling us all that the school she was at, there was a teacher who everybody loved. She was brilliant. And her children did very, very well in, all the normal ways that's measured. And the parents thought she was fantastic. All the staff respected her and thought she was fantastic. And she used to tell stories. She used to, at the end of every class, if the kids were good, she'd tell them a good story. And she'd use metaphor a lot. They had an Ofsted inspection, and she and the school was marked down because she was off curricula. Now that is what we call Chitextia. Organisational Chitextia is madness. Because children learn, we all learn, through examples and stories and anecdotes. Anyway, I don't know why I said that, but it seemed relevant to you.
Thank you for your talk. It's really interesting. When I was reading for the lecture, I noticed that you actually brought a quote up from at the end, worked with Idris Shah, and found correlations with Sufism. And I was wondering how you saw Sufism influencing the way that you're working, or this idea of trance.
Well, I think if you want to know that, you should read my memoirs, because most people here wouldn't know what you're talking about. I'm glad you do, but other people. It's just he was a very remarkable man who introduced lots of traditional ideas in ways that are applicable to modern psychology and this sort of work, but other sorts of work as well. And he would say these are just fundamentals. These are people who go all airy-fairy about spirituality without these basics in place are whistling in the wind, really. Right.
Good morning. Thank you, sir, for the presentation and your ideas on emotional needs. I was just wondering, can we extend William Glasser's model of choice theory and also the differentiation between real world and quality world? Because I do see a lot of meaningful needs here coming out, like meaning and privacy for reflection and consolidating. So can we still use the same framework of choice theory?
Well, yes, you could, but if you want to. But what we've done, we're talking about innate needs. Adler talked about innate needs, Glasser, all sorts of people, and the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I don't think quite works in a hierarchy, but and he didn't towards the end of his life, Maslow. But obviously people have thought about this, actually going back thousands of years to the ancient Greeks. They've talked about this sort of thing. So, and in different cultures. So we've kind of drawn on all that knowledge, really, and tried to make it something that people could listen to and think, oh gosh, the light bulb goes on. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And I don't mean professors and people like that. I mean ordinary people, because it's the ordinary people that are suffering. And so you have to be able to not worry too much about models, but understand innate human needs.
There was also one additional comment, not related to this, but in terms of the gender debate, because I practice in India, in Mumbai, and what we do identify there is that men don't seek help. And there is a lot of patriarchy that's involved as a result. And
yes.
It's in the younger children, it's actually boys who come in because the parents will get boys in for therapy sooner. It seems like girls are somehow more resilient to the emotional challenges.
Yeah.
But as adults, it's actually reverse, and it's the women coming in, and men are usually seen either with issues of addiction or psychosis.
Yeah.
They come in much later, or they just go undiagnosed.
Yeah.
So
it's true.
It's necessarily a men-women difference.
There are huge differences between men and women, although now we're all supposed to be the same. And there are. I don't know India, so I can't comment on the particular thing that you're talking about there. I don't think, but it's true that in a very male-dominated society, men don't like to admit to emotional problems, and they tend to solve them by addictive behaviours or committing suicide more often than women do. And they get emotional when they're not able to think straight. And we all, as I said earlier, when we get emotional, we become stupid. All of us. You just can't see the bigger picture when you're emotional. And any type of emotion, you know. But we need emotions. They're the bane of humanity. We have to carry them all the time. Because emotions drive us to do things. But if they get out of hand, we do terrible things to one another. And so, you know, we fight, we destroy our children's lives, etc., etc. I don't know enough about the Indian scene to be able to give you really good advice about that. But I hope there's some advice in our book anyway, you know, because we do talk about gender differences.
And I'll come over to you, sir. I certainly enjoyed your talk. I thought it was very logical and rational. What if you're trying to help people who do have learning difficulties like autism, like Asperger's, and they don't necessarily think in that kind of a way, and you don't
Yes.
have to reach them?
Well, the more left-brain ones, you have to give them a secure, rules-orientated environment that they can work with, because they still have needs. You see, they're still trying to get these needs. They can very often be very depressed because they know they're missing something. They know they're not like everybody else, because they don't get the jokes, or they say jokes which they think people find funny, but they don't find funny. They're out of step, and that can make them feel very uncomfortable. You need really good schools for Asperger children, and we don't really have them in this country. I don't know, perhaps you work in one.
No, I agree with that. Yeah.
And it's sad, because what you have to remember with people with Asperger's is some of the most creative people on the planet have got Asperger's, and they are musicians, they're scientists, writers, actors and actresses. There's a very high percentage of Asperger's amongst actors and actresses, and this is because when they were little, they didn't quite connect up. They started mimicking the people around them, so they're very good mimics. And then they'd go into acting, and people would think they were fantastic, and so they'd get a lot of needs met that way. But if you look at the personal lives of a lot of artists and creative people, they're an absolute shambles because they're autistic. You know, they may be highly intelligent in many ways, specific ways. I mean, Einstein was Asperger's, as you know. Sorry, we've got another one here.
Yeah.
More and more hands are going up, sorry.
Hi, thanks very much. Thanks for an excellent talk. I was hoping you could shed a bit more light on REM sleep. You mentioned, I think, a few times on its importance to actually help your body release tensions, speaking as a layperson.
Well, act out, yeah, metaphorically. That metaphorical process in a dream, it satisfies, the autonomic nervous system is relaxed by the dreaming. But when you get intense stress and you're worrying intensely, there's so much stuff to be dealt with in the dreaming that you're over-REMing and under the other type of sleep, slow wave sleep, the relaxing.
So my question specifically related to that. When you are actually overloaded, I think in the world right now there's a lot of quackery and there's a lot of therapies that can be effective. Things like from yoga to hyperventilating in oxygen chambers to LED lights into your eyes to build ocular cells. Do you have any comments in relation?
Well, my comment is keep it simple. You know, really keep it simple. Very often, if something gets complicated and a bit weird, it is weird. So you know, it's that. Keep it simple. We know that psychosis is people are the same circuits that are firing off when someone's hearing voices is the same circuit that fires off when we're dreaming, for example, and they're muddling up waking reality with dreaming reality.
Thank you.
Sorry. There's one in the front here who keeps putting a hand up, so...
I did promise they only.
All right, we'll just queue up.
I will come to the front next.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you for the talk today. So my question is basically to do with the emotional needs. How much would you say self-worth comes into play in our ability to go after change?
I missed, could you just say that bit again? How much what?
How much would you say innate self-worth comes into play?
Self-worth.
To our ability to take action in our own lives.
The thing is, innate self-worth, it's a bit of an abstraction, isn't it? I read an article yesterday about some woman going around the country saying we've all got to love ourselves better. And she was clearly a charlatan, you know, snake oil. She was. And the article made that by Julie Burchill, I think. She went along to this woman, and it's all about selling courses and all the rest of it. And they had to chant, I love me, and all that kind of thing. Well, self-worth, if you can get your needs met for example, learning, like I said about, you know, teaching youngsters to do things they never thought they'd ever do, like riding horses or going potholing or whatever, doing new things with other people, this feeling of low self-esteem disappears. And I hate the word self-esteem, you know. We shouldn't esteem the self. I mean, wise people have been saying that for thousands of years. Our focus should be out on other people. And then we get healthier and healthier when we're helping people or learning from them or working with them. That's the innate self-worth. I'm not quite sure. I'm having difficulty with that, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's just I've noticed sometimes in people when they're kind of talking about an anxiety or something that they're scared to do, it's most of the time because they're very worried about what other people are going to remark on what they've done, and therefore it makes them not want to put anything out there. And I can kind of see that it's something.
Yes, but that's really to do with how they've been brought up and how they've been educated at school and so on. Yeah.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you for a wonderful talk. And on one of your graphs at the end was breakdown. Know which graph I'm talking about?
No. We should say that again. So with one of the graphs.
One of your graphs at the end, you start the PTSD and so on, and you get to breakdown.
Oh, the human function curve.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for people that get to that extreme of complex PTSD, and people with more than one trauma, severe trauma, or complex PTSD, trauma all their lives, and so on. I can see obviously that their needs have not been met since early childhood. So how do you approach that? Because their brains are already
programmed. You have to reprogram them. You sort of reprogram them, and you have to deal with all those traumas, and you can do. I once de-traumatized a woman who'd been married to an Asperger vicar, I think he was, or chaplain or something, and he led her a terrible life without really realizing it. And I de-traumatized the whole marriage in a single session.
Yeah, but okay, there are different approaches. That CBT doesn't work, but reprogramming the brain and coaching and repetition and so on.
Yeah.
But it looks, I don't know, it looks that for people that I've seen, it looks like there's missing this whole, the idea of a whole approach.
No, I disagree with you there. I think this is a whole approach. I really do.
No, not yours. So that's why I wanted to use this approach.
Yeah.
I wanted to see how to apply
Yes.
it.
Well, yeah. Well, I can't give the courses here, but I'm glad that you do. You have. I mean, for example, if you're interested in PTSD and trauma, you should do the workshop that we do on that subject. And we show a film on that of a girl who had 2 friends murdered, and also was present when a friend of hers who got pregnant didn't want to tell her parents. She was only about 15, and she jumped off Clifton Suspension Bridge. And she'd also been abused when she was young, this woman, and all dealt with in one session. And they were complex things, and you can see how it can be done. It's not that difficult.
With the human given approach.
Mm.
Thank you.
There's a chap here who's been asking, I know you're probably trying to shut me up, quite rightfully.
Thank you. Thanks for an interesting talk. I just wanted to ask, for patients suffering from, for example, depression and anxiety that have been treated with the human givens approach, what's the sort of remission from symptom rates that they have, and how does that compare to CBT and other popular approaches?
Well, it's much better. There's been peer-reviewed research. I know I was knocking it earlier, but a university studied mild to moderate depression, and you should always try and get people early. Of course, there's nothing worse in this country than putting people on waiting lists. You should try and get people early when they're getting anxious or getting depressed. But mild to moderate depression, we're 3 times faster than CBT, drug treatments, and anything else. We usually get people out, very, very quickly. And that's published in Mental Health Review.
Okay.
And it's just experience. We know because we're doing it. They want to stop me now, don't they? Do you want? Yes, I thought so. Right, I'll go.
We're breaking for lunch now, and you can all be back probably 1 o'clock, hopefully, possible.